Hello everyone, today's data science interview question is from Meta. We'll run you through the step-by-step solution using a framework that you can use for any coding question, whether on an interview or on the job. But before we do that, if you want to learn more about data science, hit the subscribe button. Our interview question for today is popular posts. If you want to interactively follow along with us, you'll find a link to the question in the description below. The question reads, calculate the total time that each post was viewed by users. It asks you to identify posts which have a total viewing time of more than 5 seconds. These are called popular posts. In calculating total view time per post, we must use the percentage viewed, which shows the proportion of time the user spent viewing the post in a single session. Before we start, let me tell you a little bit about the framework we use. It consists of 3 steps. Step 1, exploring the dataset. Step 2, writing out the approach. And step 3, coding the solution. Before starting to code, understand the dataset and make sure you understand the columns in each table. Make sure you understand their data types and what the data really represents. There are probably tricks and edge cases, so while exploring the dataset, engage the interviewer and ask clarifying questions and explicitly state your assumptions about the data. Then write out your approach and outline the steps you would take to solve the problem. Don't code yet, just write out your approach as sentences and pseudocode and verify with the interviewer. This engages the interviewer, creates dialogue, and verifies if your logic is correct. Then you can start coding your solution. Okay, let's get started. Exploring the dataset. We are provided 2 tables, user sessions and post views. Let's look into user sessions. The table contains session ID, user ID, session start time, session end time, and platform. We can assume that the session ID is the primary key for this table, as all the other columns provide supporting details for a particular session. An exercise you can do to deepen your understanding of the data is to create a narrative on how the various columns or tables were created. This helps you to determine the relationships between the columns of the same dataset or across different datasets. It can also prompt you to engage your interviewer in a dialogue, especially if you have questions or assumptions you'd like to clarify. This is crucial because any new information that surfaces could influence your approach to the problem. In this case, we can hypothesize that a unique session ID is created every time a user logs into a platform and starts a session. To be specific, each session ID is continuous and unique to a user and platform combination. So if a user logs off and logs back in, that should create a new session ID. Similarly, if a user switches from laptop to mobile, that will be recorded as 2 separate sessions. So we can expect to see repeated user IDs and user ID platform combinations in the user sessions table. You may have already figured this out intuitively by looking at the schema, but communicating this level of insight demonstrates your depth of understanding and attention to detail to the interviewer. The second table, post views, has the following schema: the session ID, post ID, and percentage viewed. Let's look into that. In an interview, we may or may not be provided with a preview of the data. If not, imagine how the actual information may look like and verify if this is correct. For example, you will really need to understand whether 10% shows up as 0.1 or 10.0 in the percentage viewed column. This will impact how we calculate viewing times later on. Luckily, as you practice on StrataScratch platform, you can run queries to check these assumptions out for yourself. Now, on previewing the table, we can confirm that 10% is displayed as 10 and not 0.1. Let's not forget to relate this to the previous table. Continuing the narrative we created earlier, a user logs into a platform and starts a session. In each session, the user probably undertakes a few different activities like viewing different posts. Therefore, we can look at the post views table and expect to see A, multiple session IDs, because several posts can be viewed in a single session, and B, multiple post IDs, because posts can be viewed multiple times in different sessions. Let's move on to step number 2 of our 3-step approach, which is writing out the approach. Now that we have explored the dataset, it's time to think about our approach to solving this question. While formulating the approach, I usually start by thinking about what the output should look like and then identify what data and transformations are required to get there. For this question, the target table looks like this. It includes the post ID and the total viewing time, which is filtered by popular posts. But before filtering only for popular posts, we would need to get the total viewing time for all posts. So in other words, it will be the sum of viewing time per post across various sessions. Now, the viewing time per post across various sessions can be calculated by taking a certain percentage of the session duration. So we can write the equation viewing time equals session duration multiplied by percentage viewed divided by 100. The output of this is going to be in decimal format. Now, this equation requires two key information: session duration and percentage viewed. Session duration is the difference between session end time and session start time, both of which are found in the user sessions table. So we can rewrite this equation as session end time minus session start time multiplied by percentage viewed. Now, percentage viewed is the representation of percentage of the sessions spent viewing the post. This can be found in the post views table. So at a high level, the steps we need to take are: step 1, calculate the session duration from the user sessions table. Step 2, combine this with the post views table to calculate the post's view times in each session. Step 3, aggregate the total viewing time per post across all sessions. And step 4, select only the posts where total viewing time is greater than 5 seconds. Then ask the interviewer for any feedback about your approach. Once you have agreed on the approach, it's time to start coding. First, let's calculate the session duration. We can find all the information we need in user sessions table. So from the user sessions table, let's select the session ID and calculate the duration. Knowing how to work with extract clause is crucial in dealing with datetime variables. Extract clause allows you to retrieve information like minutes, seconds, days, day of the week, etc. In this case, we will use the extract epoch combination in order to get the difference in seconds. If any of you are curious, extract epoch from column returns a Unix timestamp or a Unix epoch time, which is the number of seconds that have elapsed since midnight Thursday, 1st of January 1970, Coordinated Universal Time or UTC. So on its own, that is without any operation, the Unix timestamp is not meaningful for our analysis. However, once we take the difference between the two, it would be equivalent to getting the time difference between the two datetime values in seconds, which is exactly what we need. Now, running the code would give us a resulting table with the duration in seconds for each session. Before moving on to the next step, I want to mention that there are other ways to approach this step. For example, you can directly subtract the session start time and end time to get the duration, like so. So the query would look like this, and the output looks like this. From the initial inspection of results, the two queries seem to yield the same tables. However, what is not so obvious is that the two approaches create different data types. Subtracting two datetime values results in an interval data type instead of a float or integer. This is a key point to revisit later on. For now, let's stick to the first method using extract epoch from and combine this with the percentage viewed to calculate the session duration. As we're calculating the viewing time at the post level, our reference table should be post views table. This can be merged with the previous query through a join. As we expect all session IDs in the post views table to be found in the user sessions table, a left or inner join should provide the same result. So from our post views table, we will perform a join to the query built in step 1, which we'll call S. This will allow us to retrieve the various information required to calculate the viewing time. We are dividing percentage viewed by 100 to get a fraction. However, if we had just assumed the format of the data to be the proportion itself, we would be making an error by missing out on this step. This goes to show how important it is to get to know your data. Now, the result of the query looks like this. Well, this looks right. As mentioned in our approach earlier, we're calculating the viewing time per post per session. So as you'll see in the output, there are multiple entries for each post, each one representing a view for a separate session. Let's get the total viewing time for each post across all sessions by performing an aggregation at post ID level. The final query looks like this. Let's run the code and see the output. Alright, as you'll notice, we have only one row per post. Next, we want to show only the posts which have more than 5 seconds of viewing time. This can be easily done with a having clause. When it comes to filtering rows or results based on a certain criteria, we typically use the where clause or the having clause. The difference between the two is basic knowledge, but be sure to be able to explain this to the interviewer. The difference lies in what it filters on and when it does the filtering. In a nutshell, the where clause filters on rows of the reference dataset and performs this before the aggregation. Meanwhile, having clause is performed after the aggregation, as it only filters on group-based or aggregate data. Using the having clause to select only the popular post, our final solution looks like this. Let's run the code and validate it. Alright, this shows us that there are two popular posts, post ID 4 with a total view time of 5.1 seconds and post ID 2 with a total of 24 seconds view time. Notice that in the last step, we're making a comparison between values in the having clause. This is where knowledge about data types becomes absolutely crucial, because comparing different data types, for instance an integer with an interval, will result in an error. This is where many candidates make mistakes. So if you had used the second method of subtracting two data time columns directly, let's see what the result would be. It would throw an error. We're getting an error because the sum function over here outputs an interval and we're comparing this to an integer. So how can we make this work? Well, we can convert the integer number 5 to an interval 5. Alright, now let's run the code. This also works. Lastly, let's look at ways of optimizing the current solution. One thing we can do is make our query more readable through the use of common table expressions, or CTEs for short. It's a named temporary result set and it exists only within the scope of the query. So we can rewrite our solution as, here we can see that this looks like a subquery. The CTE is similar to a subquery, so if you understand subqueries, you'll get through with CTEs. Let's run the code. And validate it, and here we go. So our result is correct, and so is our query. We hope you enjoyed solving this question. This SQL question is considered hard because it requires you to be knowledgeable on various topics like joins, aggregations, filters, and data time variables, which are tested in different steps of the solution. We'd like to really emphasize on the importance of practice and trying out new types of problems so that you aren't caught off guard in your interviews. Practice along with our team by checking out the StrataScratch YouTube channel or by solving questions on our platform. Hope to see you again. Goodbye.